In this tutorial we're going to be exploring many new features of Modo 601, including particles, soft body dynamics, deformers and retopology. But underpinning this will be a demonstration of the integrated workflow that underpins the whole Modo experience. We'll go from polygon modeling to sculpting, from retopology to UVing, from painting to rigging, and from animation to rendering. But importantly, we'll do it in a seamless and fluid manner as we create this animation of a rockfish swimming under the sea. So the first thing that we need is some reference imagery. So if you go to the content folder that comes with this video, you'll find a folder called reference, and in there there's a JPEG called rockfish side view. So just drag and drop that into the 3D view. So that creates a backdrop item in the item list. Now by default, when you create a backdrop item, the image is always projected in the front view. Now what that means is that you'll see the image in a perspective view, but if you go to a front view, in this case by holding down Control Spacebar and using the pie menu, so just go to front, it means you can see it in both the perspective and the front view. But I want to model the fish from the side view. Now if I hold down Control Spacebar again and go to right, you can see I can't see the reference image anymore. So I need to change the projection type to right. Now at the moment the fish's head is pointing along the negative z-axis, and I want to model it so that the fish's head is pointing along the positive z-axis. So I need to flip it round. So to do that I'm just going to rotate that item by 180 degrees. So the final thing I need to do is just add some transparency to this image, because at the moment it's very dominant in the viewport. So in properties we'll just increase the transparency to 80%. So the plan for this build is to first of all create a base mesh which we can then sculpt to create all of this interesting fin detail that the rockfish has. And then we'll use the retopology tools to create the model that we can animate. So when it comes to creating the base mesh, we could create it from scratch, but I'm a firm believer in reusing geometry that you've already made. Now for Modo 601 I created a sardine for a tutorial, and to all intents and purposes the structure of a sardine is very similar to the structure of a rockfish. So what I've done is I've given you the sardine model. If you go to the content folder, you'll find a sardine LXO. So I'll open that up, hit Shift A to fit to the viewport, and then we'll just go to the perspective view. So as you can see, it's a very simple mesh, but all of the topology that we need is there, which makes it ideal as a base mesh to sculpt on. But the first thing we need to do is remove the detail that we don't need. Now when it comes to sculpting this fish, these fins are just going to get in the way, and also we don't have to worry about where the eye is because we can sculpt that in too. So if we go to a polygon mode and turn symmetry on the X, we just need to remove those items. So we'll start with the eye, select the middle of it, hold down Shift and hit the up arrow to expand the selection, and then hit delete. And then if we select two polygons on the back of this fin, hold down Shift and hit the up arrow, and we just need to select all of the polygons that relate to the fin. So we also need to delete the polygons where it attaches to the body. So delete those. Same here. Down Shift in the up arrow, and hit delete. Delete these ones. And you'll have to hold down Shift and select these polygons and hit delete. And then we can also get rid of this fin, but we'll keep the tail fin. So now what we need to do is fill the holes. So we'll start under here, go to edge mode, double click on the edge loop to select it, hold down Control and deselect those edges, go to duplicate and run the bridge tool, click in the viewport. Now we're going to need another edge running through the middle, so change the segments to 2, spacebar to drop the tool, and now we've got a little hole in the mesh, and we can fill that by going to the polygon tab and running the topology pen, grabbing this point and just moving it to the other one, and the two will snap together. So then we have to do basically the same thing over here. So drop the tool, select the edges, deselect the end edges, run the bridge tool, click in the viewport. Now the new edge that's created is a little bit too far down, so I'm going to drop the bridge tool, double click on that edge, hit W, and we'll just move it up on the Y and across on the X. Drop that tool, again run the topology pen, and now we can weld those points. So it's pretty much the same with the eye, but there are a couple of little differences. So if you select the edges run the bridge tool and click in the viewport, you notice that the new edge that's created is sticking out quite a long way. So I'm just going to change the mode to linear. So now we just need to fill the gaps. So drop that tool, we'll run the topology pen, and we'll snap that point and also that point. Now because the eye was circular, we've now got a kind of zigzagged line going through there, which isn't great. We need to keep them as straight as possible. So still with the topology pen running, we just want to turn off snapping, so hit X, and now we can grab some of these points and just straighten those edges up. So for the holes on the top and the bottom, it's exactly the same process, but because they're sitting on the center line, the bridge tool won't work if symmetry is on. So you'll have to turn symmetry off, and then you can select the edges, run the bridge tool, and then weld the holes, and do the same down here. And there we have our fish base mesh. So now we need to get this into the other scene, so go to polygon mode, Control C to copy, go into the other scene into a blank mesh item and hit Control V to paste. So as you can see, relative to the reference image, the mesh is very small. So if we go to the right hand view, go into a component mode, hit the R key, and using the circle in the middle of the tool handle, we'll just click and drag, and we'll scale the mesh so it's roughly the same length as the rockfish reference image. Now this mesh has two areas of detail, the mouth and also the tail. So what we need to do is lock those in place, and then the rest of the mesh is simply a blend between them. So we'll start with the tail, so let's zoom in. Now if you hit 5 on the numeric keypad, you go into a wireframe view, and if you want to go back to the shaded view, you can hit 4, so you can toggle quite easily between those. So hit 5, and in polygon mode I'm just going to right click and lasso the whole tail, hit the W key, and move it down so it's central on the reference image. Drop a tool, and then I'm going to run a linear fall off and drag it from there to the base of the tail, hit the R key, and I'm going to scale it on the Y axis until it matches the reference image. So with the fall off still active in the viewport, I'll hold my right mouse button and lasso the top fin, and then I'll move the fall off so it runs across that fin, hit the W key, and then move it until it matches, roughly matches the reference image. You'll not be able to get it perfect. Then drop the tool and then move the fall off to the tip of the tail, hit the W key, and move it again to create that curve. So then we need to do the same with the tail at the bottom. So select it, move the fall off, W key, move the geometry. And for the back of the fin, I'm just going to select the polygons at the end, move the fall off, hit the W key, move that over. Again, it's just a rough placement, and then we'll do the same with this side. Move the geometry. So hit the spacebar and then escape to remove the fall off. And now it's a question of just tweaking the outer shape of this fin. So hit the T key for element move, and you can just go through it, moving these edges so it matches the reference image. So when you've finished matching the shape of the fin to the reference image, you'll find that you'll have a row of large polygons running along the back of the fin. So just to even everything up, we'll come to Edge, run the Add Loop tool, click on an edge to add a new edge loop, then hit the T key again, and that gives us a little bit more to work with at the tip of each fin so we can define the shape more accurately. Now we're going to be able to use this mesh in the final model. So getting this right at this point is going to be time well spent. So for the mouth, I'm going to start by selecting the front of the mesh, and then I'm going to run a linear fall off that goes from the base of the selection to the start of the mouth. Now the reason for that is it means that when I'm moving the mouth around, these edges aren't going to cross over each other. It's just going to make it easier to work with. Okay, so with that selected, hit the W key and move the mouth into position. And you can see how those edges aren't crossing each other. So hit the E key and rotate the mouth around. Now you can see the mouth is a lot smaller, so I'm going to need to scale it up. So hit the R key, and I just want to scale it on the Y and the Z. I'm going to do that with the planar transform handle, which is this little circle. So I'll scale that up. That's the right size now. Move it into position. Now on the reference image, the mouth is open. Now it's probably a good idea to model it with the mouth open, because it'll allow you to paint it more easily and also select the polygons that are inside of the mouth more easily. So I'm going to drop the move tool and I'm just going to select the bottom jaw. So select a polygon, hold down shift and hit the up arrow to expand the selection. Then hit the W key. I'll move that into position. Drop the tool and hit escape to remove the fall off. And then with T, or element move, you can just line everything up to the reference image. So with the mouth done, we can now do the body. So I'm going to hold down my right mouse button and I'm going to lasso select the polygons at the top of the fish. I'm going to run a linear fall off, drag it from the back to about there, hit the W key and move it up, and that matches the line of the body underneath this fin. Drop the tool, then move the fall off so it's at the front of this dorsal fin. Again, move it up a little bit to create that curve, and finally move it to the front and bring that down. Then we need to select the polygons for the bottom. And this time I'm just going to go to lists and to the pipeline, and you can see the linear fall off in there, and I'm just going to turn off evaluate. So it's still in the pipeline, but it's just turned off. So I'm going to hit W and move that selection down. Then I'm going to bring back the fall off, move it to there, hit the W key, and move that so it matches the reference image. Move the fall off to the front and do the same. So I've just used element move to match the reference image perfectly, and now we can do the polygons in the middle. So I'm just going to select them, hit the W key, I'm going to move them and rotate them so they're more central, and hit the R key and then scale them on the Y. Now some of these edges need to be spread out a little bit more, so what I'm going to do is turn symmetry on the X, and in edge mode I'm going to double click on that edge to select the edge loop, and then I'm going to run off a linear fall off and drag it from there to there. Then under edge I'm going to run the slide tool and then drag in the viewport, and that will move the edge further up, and then you can adjust the fall off to adjust the amount of slide. So drop a tool, then select that edge loop, and again run slide, move it up a little bit, you might want to adjust the fall off, and the next one, need to look at these ones at the bottom as well. So to finish the shape, we just need to fix this transition between the mouth and the body, and the best way to do this is just by running element move and positioning all of the edges manually. So when you finish that, that's the profile of the fish complete. Now it looks great in 2D, but what does it look like in 3D? Well, to find out, we'll hit 4 to go back to a shaded view, we'll hide the backdrop item, and then we'll go to a perspective view. Now because of the way we've edited the mesh, the continuity of the surface is pretty good. The only issues we've got is at the bottom here we've got quite a hard edge, and also at the top. So to fix that, I'm just going to select those edges, hit the W key and move them up, and we'll do the same on the top. Hit the W key and move them down. That just helps to smooth the whole thing off. So that looks great on the side, but if we rotate him around, so we're looking down the Z, you can see that he looks very squashed. Now the reason he's so thin is because he's derived from a sardine, which is a very thin, slender fish. But if we look at a picture of a rockfish, you can see he's much fatter, much more muscular looking shape. So based on your reference image, just hit the R key. I'm going to turn symmetry off, and we'll just scale him on the X to create a rounder shape. So when you're happy with the width of your fish, you now need to make sure that the mouth is right. Now if I just rotate him over here, you can see how the mouth is quite straight, which is giving him these kind of cheeks, which isn't right. There should be a much more gradual kind of tapering to the nose. So to fix that, make sure symmetry's on, hit T for element move, right click and drag to create an influence area, and then we just want to select the corner of the mouth and just pull that out to make so the mouth is tapering a lot more. And then reduce the fall off, and then you can make more localized changes. Same here, you might want to bring this down a little bit. That's now a much better transition going from the body to the nose. So tweak the mesh as much as you think is necessary to create that basic shape of a rockfish. But remember, we're not creating the final model here, we're creating a nice smooth starting point. Now one thing you might want to do, if I hit Shift Tab, you can see how the mouth changes shape quite considerably. I just want to hold that shape. So I'm going to select all of the polygons inside the mouth, hit B for bevel, click in the viewport and just inset it slightly, and that gives me a much harder line along here for the mouth, which would be a lot easier for me to define the shape of the mouth when it comes to sculpting and also retopology. So in this section we're going to be sculpting the base mesh to define the volumes and details that we want in the final model, and I'm going to be using this photograph as my main point of reference. So when I'm modelling a creature like this, I like to stick to as few reference images as possible. And the reason for this is that animals are as unique as humans. So if I had 10 images of different rockfish, they're all going to be subtly different, and using them as reference would just get confusing. So in this process, I'm only going to use 2 images. I've got my side view, which is going to give me my proportions, and then I've got this 3/4 view, which is going to give me everything else. So the elements that I want to define during this process are the belly, the base of the pectoral fin, the gills and these interesting horns that are part of the gills, the mouth details, and also the eye. So the first thing we need to do is to set up this base mesh ready for sculpting. The first thing to do is to make sure that it's symmetrical. Now the best way to check this is to turn symmetry on, so we'll turn symmetry on the X, and if we go to the geometry menu we'll run the symmetry tool. Click in the viewport, and if you see any yellow dots, that means that those points are not symmetrical. So to fix them, all you've got to do is click and drag in the viewport, and once they've all disappeared, you know that the model is symmetrical. The next thing to do is to turn it into a P-submodel. So hit Shift Tab to subdivide it, and then if we go to Properties, come right down to the bottom and we need to check multi-resolution to turn it into a multi-resolution mesh, and then we need to set the subdivision level, and this will be the maximum number of polygons that we have to work with, and I'm going to set that to 5. And you can see down in the bottom right hand corner that we have just under 2 million polygons to work with. So one thing to remember is you don't have to sculpt in this viewport. You can change Modo to help you in this process, and in fact that's one of the great things about Modo's UI. So to sculpt this, I'm going to go to the Paint tab. That gives us a nicer lighting on the object. And I don't like to see the wireframe or the grid in the viewport. I think it clutters the whole thing up. So I'm going to hit O to bring up viewport properties. I'm going to go to visibility, I'm going to decheck show grid, and if I go back to drawing and control, I'm going to go to wireframe overlay, and I'm going to turn that off. We can also change how the object is shaded in OpenGL to help us with the sculpting process. Because at the moment we've got this flat grey, but if we open up the preset browser and go to the asset library, we've now got a folder called Matte Caps, and if you scroll down we've got a PNG called Red Wax. So I'm just going to drag and drop that into the top of the shader tree, and you can see it's loaded that image map in at the top, and its effect is set to diffuse color. But we want to turn this into a shader. So if you right click on it, go to change type, and under other you'll find matte cap shader. So just select that. So the first thing that I want to define is this fat belly that the fish has. Now that's quite a broad area of detail, so I don't need an enormous amount of resolution in the model to define it. So let's go to item list and select mesh in properties, and let's change the current level down to 2. So I'm going to be sculpting at a subdivision level of 2. So I need to use the backdrop item to help me define the exact position of the belly. So I'm going to turn the backdrop item back on. Let's go to right hand view. Now we can't see the backdrop item, but if we hit O to bring up viewport properties, come down to the bottom and we need to check overlay. Now we can see that the belly starts from the front of the anal fin, comes up around here to the pectoral fin. So let's create a brush. So let's go on the push tool, and I want to change the shape preset from smooth to fat. So right click for your brush size, and we just want to define where that is. Now if we go back to the perspective view, you can see what we've defined, and now we can refine it. Now remember the keyboard shortcuts when you're doing this, so just mousing down applies the brush, control inverts the brush. For example, this is sticking out too far, so let's just push it back a little bit, and then holding down shift runs the smooth tool, so you can smooth the mark out. So the belly has to start quite aggressively by that fin, but then it needs to taper out towards the mouth. And another thing we need to do is, at the moment the tail is almost like a perfect oval, but it needs to be thinner at the bottom than it is at the top. So with the same brush, I'm just going to hold down control and just push that back. So when you're finished, make sure you don't over exaggerate how fat he is. It needs to be quite subtle. So the next thing to define is the base of the pectoral fin. So let's go to the right hand view. Now we need a little bit more detail in the mesh, so I'm going to increase the current level to 3 and change the brush back to smooth. And looking at my reference image, the surface of the body kind of raises up before the actual fin itself. So I'm just going to draw a line where that fin is. So let's go back to the perspective view, and that gives us our rough starting point. So this kind of needs to, again, a bit like the stomach, needs to be quite hard edged on the rear, and then it needs to blend off at the front. So I can bring this up a little bit, hold down shift and smooth it out. Now the blend at the rear of this shape needs to be a lot sharper, so let's increase the detail of the current level to 4, and I'm going to change my shape preset to sharp. Right click for my brush size, hold down Control to invert it, and then I just want to push that in to sharpen it up. Now you can see that that shape looks a lot like a gill, so we're going to approach the gills in more or less the same way. So I'm going to drop the current level back down to 3 again. We'll go to the right hand view. Now you can see that gills are layered on top of each other, so what we're going to do is start with the lowest one and then build the other ones on top of it. So put the shape preset back to smooth, and this is the first gill here, so we need quite a small brush, and then just define it based on the reference image. Go back to the perspective view, and that's our starting point. So like before, I've built it up so that the transition between the gill and the mouth is nice and smooth. So now we can sharpen it up by increasing the current level, changing the shape preset of the brush to sharp, holding down Control and defining that line. Now if you want to tighten that up even more, then we can change the brush shape back to smooth, run the flatten tool, and then just run the brush along that edge, and you can see how that's helping to define that a little bit more. And then if you want to sharpen it even more, we can up the current level to 5, which is the maximum level, and then if you run tangent pinch, we can just run the brush along that edge. So for the next gill, we'll drop the current level down to 3, bring back the reference image, got the side view, and this is quite an interesting gill because it's got this horn on it. So we'll go to the push tool and we'll draw it out. Back to the perspective view, and now we can build it up. Now on the top of the head, we want to add 3 little horns there, and then the top here, this needs to come down to create almost like eyebrows that eventually come around the eye, but we can define that a little bit later. So I've gone through the same process with that gill of smoothing it off, flattening it and sharpening it, and now I've laid down that gill layer. That leads into 3 areas of detail: the jaw, the eye, and also some of the horns that are actually on this gill. So let's bring back the reference image, go to the right hand view, and I'm going to drop the current level down to 4. So in this side view I need to define 2 lines, so I'm going to run the push tool, set the shape preset to bulge, have quite a small brush, and on the side of the mouth here I'm going to hold down Control and it's going to follow the line there. And if we go to the eye, I just want to define the outside edge of the eye. So for the jaw, we just need to create this, it's kind of a bottom lip. So I'll just bring that groove around the edge. And if we change the shape preset to smooth, we can just kind of bring this out, make it a bit more rounded, and then also do the same here. Now for the eye, if we look at it straight on, you can see that it's leaning over a little bit too much. It needs to be more vertical. So if we run the move tool, just grab the top of the eye and we'll just move it over. So next we can build up the eyeball. So make a brush the same size as the eyeball and just bring it out like that, and then hold down Shift and smooth it off. Now the shapes around the eye are quite interesting. First of all, we have a shape that runs across the top and tapers off there. It's kind of like an eyelid, but fish don't really have eyelids. And then we have another shape that comes around in front of that and kind of tapers off that way. I kind of distinguish like a line between those two things. You can see how they kind of fold in over each other. And then finally, there's kind of an eyebrow, particularly on this rockfish. Kind of comes up along here. Comes around the eye and then kind of blends out down here. So I've gone up to level 5 and I've just refined the details around the eye, and there's two little details I want to put in. So I'm going to go down to level 4, and just on this gill there's two little horns. So again with push active, quite a small brush, and the first horn kind of comes in like that and blends out, and the second one is about here. So with those two little horns done, we can now move on to the final gill. So we'll drop down to level 3, bring back the backdrop item, go to the right view, and this gill comes from the mouth around, and it has a number of these horns on it. So stick with a smooth brush and draw out the shape. So I've smoothed that gill out, flattened it and sharpened it in the same way as I did with the other gills. And the final thing we need to define is the upper lip. So let's drop current level back down to 3, bring back the backdrop item, got the right hand view, and you can see it here. So with the push tool and quite a small brush, I just want to define the outline of it, so it comes around here and then blends out to there, and then there's a line for the upper lip that goes all the way to the top. So now we just need to bring that line across to the center line, and then we need to fill out this upper lip, make it more round. And then we just need to fill it out this area. But we need to kind of maintain this groove between those two things. So to finish off, I've gone up to level 5 and I've just refined that shape just to make sure everything's blending really nicely. So take as much time as you need sculpt your fish, but when you've finished, you'll have the perfect base on which to build your final model.